always seems impossible until it's done. The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. Nelson Mandela. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. Nelson Mandela. I learned that courage was not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela. Do not judge me by my successes, judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again. Nelson Mandela. Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies. Nelson Mandela. A good head and a good heart are always a formidable combination. Nelson Mandela. After climbing a great hill, one only finds that there are many more hills to climb. Nelson Mandela. Freedom cannot be achieved unless the women have been emancipated from all forms of oppression. Nelson Mandela. I am the captain of my soul. Nelson Mandela. I dream of an Africa which is in peace with itself. Nelson Mandela. A winner is a dreamer who never gives up. Nelson Mandela. We can change the world and make it a better place. It is in your hands to make a difference. Nelson Mandela. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. Nelson Mandela. I am fundamentally an optimist. Whether that comes from nature or nurture, I cannot say. Part of being optimistic is keeping one's head pointed toward the sun, one's feet moving forward. Nelson Mandela. Real leaders must be ready to sacrifice all for the freedom of their people. Nelson Mandela. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then he becomes your partner. Nelson Mandela. It is better to lead from behind and to put others in front, especially when you celebrate victory when nice things occur. Nelson Mandela. Our human compassion binds us the one to the other, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future. Nelson Mandela. The brave man is not he who does not feel afraid, but he who conquers that fear. Nelson Mandela. I can't pretend that I'm brave and that I can beat the whole world. Nelson Mandela. I stand here before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. Nelson Mandela. I was made, by the law, a criminal, not because of what I had done, but because of what I stood for, because of what I thought, because of my conscience. Nelson Mandela. If there are dreams about a beautiful South Africa, there are also roads that lead to their goal. Nelson Mandela. Non-violence is a good policy when the conditions permit. Nelson Mandela. Let there be justice for all. Let there be peace for all. Let there be work, bread, water and salt for all. Nelson Mandela. The oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. Nelson Mandela. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. Nelson Mandela. There is no easy walk to freedom anywhere, and many of us will have to pass through the valley of the shadow of death again and again before we reach the mountaintop of our desires. Nelson Mandela. I am not a saint, unless you think of a saint as a sinner who keeps on trying. Nelson Mandela. I was not a messiah, but an ordinary man who had become a leader because of extraordinary circumstances. Nelson Mandela. I am not an optimist, but a great believer of hope. Nelson Mandela. Let us remember we are all part of one human family. I am convinced that in the end we will prevail. Nelson Mandela. The UN took a strong stand against apartheid, and over the years, an international consensus was built, which helped to bring an end to this iniquitous system. Nelson Mandela. The names of those who were incarcerated on Robben Island is a roll call of resistance fighters and Democrats spanning over 3 centuries. Nelson Mandela. Let us reach out to others in the knowledge that nobody has come to where they are on their own. Nelson Mandela. I detest racialism, because I regard it as a barbaric thing, whether it comes from a black man or a white man. Nelson Mandela. I am confident that nobody will accuse me of selfishness if I ask to spend time, while I am still in good health, with my family, my friends and also with myself. Nelson Mandela. If you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. Nelson Mandela. It is music and dancing that make me at peace with the world. Nelson Mandela. Let us not forget that freedom is not free. Nelson Mandela. I dream of an Africa which is in peace with itself. Nelson Mandela. A nation should not be judged by how it treats its highest citizens, but its lowest ones. Nelson Mandela. Action without vision is only passing time. Vision without action is merely daydreaming, but vision with action can change the world. Nelson Mandela. Difficulties break some men but make others. Nelson Mandela. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden but never extinguished. Nelson Mandela.